All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Want to thank everyone else, Jackie, Jen, Tiffany, and Susan. Go watch their presentation in the few coming weeks as well. My name's Alex. I'm a chef. I've been a chef for about 13 years now. For the most part, most of my experience has been in sushi, but I've done a lot of other things. In the past few years, like 4 or 5 years, I've been focusing on fermentation. Um, so my style of food is I'm very focused on food waste and everything that comes in that we use. It's not that I don't like to use the term waste because I don't think anything is waste. It's just, and we just have to be creative and find an extra outlet for some of these things, right? So with that approach, that's kind of what that's how I've been approaching fermentation and Koji in general. So this presentation in particular is more about how to use Koji at home and give it a new context in the sense of we have all these seasonings that we're all super familiar with, right? Like the Paul Prudhomme's, like the steak seasonings and all these other things. Um, like the Sazon Goya, for example, if you're in a Spanish household. But I feel like Koji, in its many forms, can have a place in our pantry just as much or just as well. That's one of the things that in my kitchen is pretty ubiquitous now is Koji. I use it in a lot of things and everything. Um, I'm always asked like what the limitations to what I'm talking about, so what the limitations specifically are, and really there are no limitations. Limitation are your creativity as long as you have a basic understanding of what you're doing and with the Koji. Really, the sky's the limit. Your imagination, whatever you can come up with, is the limit. So a little bit of my background, like the reason or the way I got into where I discovered molds and fermentation in general. I was living in an apartment in Florida where there's a lot of humidity. So there was a leak somewhere in like in the shower somewhere, and there was water behind the wall, and it was a lot of humidity and the heat, and it eventually caused mold behind the wall, like in between the wall. And for months, we were having these really strange symptoms that we couldn't, we went to doctors for different things and we couldn't understand where these symptoms were coming from until we one day discovered the mold behind the wall. Uh, at that point, it became apparent like how powerful just this little organism that we didn't even know existed was just tucked away and was just affecting our lives. So that kind of just sparked an interest in me and curious as to uh, how these things really tick and what's going on in their fungal world, right? Um, they're really powerful creatures, the fungus world. So moving on, the way mushrooms and most fungus consume their nutrients and whatnot is through what was called extracellular digestion. So we consume our food, right? We take our food, we eat it, we chew it, and it digests inside of us. So what extracellular digestion means basically is they're digesting their food outside of their cells, outside of their organism. So they do that by releasing enzymes from the fungus themselves, and not all, but almost all mushrooms and funguses work the same way, including most molds, where they release different enzymes into their surroundings, which break down the surrounding components into simpler nutrients that they can then directly ingest and gain nutrients from. So we can take advantage of that. It's something that's been done for thousands of years. The shoyu or soy sauce, as you classically know it, has been around for like 700 or 800 years or so, and it was something that was developed over time because of the reactions that we were seeing with this wild fermentation. That first it was wild, and then we started like domesticating it until we got a final like refined result, right? So I'll start give you a few examples of some of the ways we can use Koji in the kitchen, or some of the ways I use it. We're gonna have a couple different Kojis. This is a jasmine rice Koji, and I'm gonna start with dry applications. So this one, if you guys have any questions specifically about how to grow Koji, feel free to ask. This one in particular, I grew or I steamed the rice and made sure that the rice, although fully cooked, was as dry as possible before incubating it. So by the end, when it was done incubating, you can see it's more individual pieces versus like chunks, the way you would see like a wetter Koji. The reason I did this is to be able to put it in a dehydrator. So after I put it in a dehydrator, you can then put it in a spice grinder or a food processor and turn it into a powder, which I've done here. So I just grab the stuff, I sift it, and then it turns into this just a regular powder. You just got to sift it just to get all the big chunks and keep processing the big chunks. So these are this, and then this one I just add salt to it. So this is just plain Koji rice flour, and then this is just with some salt. And these two I use a lot in just basic everyday applications. Show you this. So one of the easiest ways, or the best ways I've found to use like a dry Koji. So these are some nice, beautiful scallops that I have. And basically, I'll just grab some of this, the one without salt first, and I'll just kind of dust them very lightly on the outside. And it's just going to keep the surface like really dry. Then I'll also use the salt, the one with salt on top of that. And then what I have here is I bought these little like little computer fans on Amazon. They're like, these are actually too small. I don't know if you can see these. These are actually really small. I got the wrong size, but they're like little computer fans that you would put to cool your electronic equipment. And basically, I'll just put these inside. And this is refrigerated temperature curing process. And basically, I'll just put the fans directly blowing on the scallops, so it'll dry the surface out. Within like a week or two, it'll be like almost like a seafood charcuterie.
Alex, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you do that at room temperature, or do you do it in the fridge?
I do it in the fridge, just because for safety. I've always been a little apprehensive of the room temp protein curing. That's just me personally. I just haven't really delved into it very far. I know there are people out there who have incubated or grown Koji directly on protein. That would be, you know, like I said, that's a totally different thing. That's actually growing the Koji on it versus this is actually using the Koji after it's already done, like another application for Koji, right? If all these things that I'm going to be talking about today, I've learned from people. I've been very blessed and lucky to have met a lot of great people. I will say that's one thing about this, the fermentation community is everyone is amazing. You have any questions, like everyone is super supportive and they all just want to see you succeed. And beyond the food aspect, it's a very good, supportive, great community. So with that being said, a great book reference to a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is the new the Koji Alchemy book by Rich, what's his name? Richard. I'm sorry. And yeah, in there they talk about actually growing the mold on the actual. They do it on steak, and I believe they do it on pork as well. Like I said, it's just something that I personally haven't because I come from a restaurant background, and it's just one of those things where it's always been a big no-no to put meat at room temp for more than half a day. So, but like I said, others have done it, and as I started saying in the beginning, this is all about your creativity. And from what I understand, one thing I guess I forgot to mention when I was talking about fungus in general is most funguses, especially Koji, they have they're very competitively exclusive, and they have almost like a penicillin-like behavior where they will kill or just basically outcompete other mold and other pathogenic things that are on it. It's not going to kill bacteria per se, but it's going to help you control that environment a lot easier than if you weren't using it. And I'll kind of give another example of that moving on when I go into things like alcohol, the way I use it for that. But that was a dry form of application. I also use it on meats, on steaks as well. This is just a sirloin steak, and I'll use just the powder just right on there as well, the powdered Koji, and it'll, in like a week, maybe two, it'll just be like almost like semi-cured, but it'll still be juicy. If you eat it within a week, it'll still be juicy. If you let it go longer, it just continues to dry and shrink. And like I said, just play with it and see what you like. If there's going to be different results for everybody depending on your environment as well and what you use. What else for dry? For dry application, as well, you can always use these as just a last minute seasoning. You don't necessarily have to do like a long enzymatic process. It can still, if you sprinkle this in your rice and beans, even whatever, in like a matter of half an hour, this stuff's already gonna start breaking some of those compounds down where it'll give you flavors you've never tasted before. So that's one way to use, a couple ways to use a dry application. The wet applications, the most common that we all know of is Shio Koji and wet Shio Koji. That was like a dry Shio Koji. So wet is regular Shio Koji, and then Amazake. And they're two very different things. I'll just explain them briefly. But Shio Koji is basically, in traditional, just normal form, it's just basically equal parts Koji. It can be rice Koji, barley Koji, whatever you're liking it. It's equal parts Koji, water, and usually between 8 to 15% salt. And basically, you just want to leave it out at room temperature for a couple days, maybe a week. The longer you let it sit out, the more flavorful it gets. At some point, you do want to put it in the fridge because the enzyme activity does start to slow down. So generally speaking, you do want to use fresh koji within 6 months. Dry koji, if you buy dry koji from like an online seller, ideally you want to use it within a year if you keep it well preserved. So applications for shio koji, use this as a marinade or as a seasoning, as a base for salad dressings. Just mix them in, instead of salt, instead of just plain regular salt in your soups or anything, just throw a little bit of this in there, and it's just going to accentuate and change everything. It's got a little bit of sweetness as well. It's a little different. This is an amazake that I had a couple days ago. Can't really see it too well, but it starts to separate, and it's like liquid forms on top. And this liquid is like, for me, is the most amazing nectar. It's incredible. It's like it's basically what mirin. Mirin is basically the liquid from the amazake, which they then, to make it mirin, they then add alcohol to, usually distilled, but in its basic form, that's what mirin is a little liquid that forms on top of the amazake. And to get amazake, just go over this real briefly. Basically, to get amazake, you take equal parts koji and another grain, whether it's rice or something else, and you incubate it somewhere where you can, around 130 degrees or so, for about 10 hours, give or take a few hours. The longer.
Good question. It's with cooked grains, right? So equal parts koji and cooked grains.
Yeah, cooked grains, either rice, whatever else. Yeah. Thank you. So what I like to do with this, easy applications at home, is honestly, I use it a lot for desserts. I'll make rice pudding is my favorite thing. I'll just throw a cinnamon stick in there, maybe a couple cloves in there when I do it, and I leave it in the oven overnight with the pilot light on, or sometimes on low if it's a particularly cold night. And basically, just make sure it's right around 130. And yeah, so I'll put rice and seasonings, and basically what I'm doing there is eliminating the need for sugar. When you make rice pudding, traditionally you'll put in, like, I don't know, 2 cups of sugar for whatever, and it's not that great for you. But this way you're able to go around it. It's still very sweet, very delicious, but it's not you're not adding all these extra carbohydrates or refined sugars, at least. Another way is I make with oats. This koji that I have here is oats, and I'll use this and do like overnight oats. Same kind of deal as the rice pudding. Just leave it overnight with some cinnamon, maybe some maple syrup. Even if you do throw a little sugar and some kind of sweetener in there, the enzymes are actually going to break those down into simpler sugars, and it's going to be like, I don't know. Last time I got like these weird flavors of vanilla, that I didn't throw vanilla in my oatmeal, but I could have sworn it tasted like vanilla. And you get all these crazy compounds that are just naturally created through the breakdown process. Another really traditional preservation, like I was saying at the beginning, my main thing is preservation. So it's always looking at how to apply this at the restaurants I've been working at, how to apply this to food waste and things, just things not going bad. For example, with the there's a traditional preservation method called ritarazuke, And basically that's, you take some amazake and you just add a little bit of salt, not as much as you would for a shio koji, but you grab the already made sweet, already done amazake, add a little salt, and add a little alcohol to it. Usually sake, usually is what they use. And you can use that almost as a pickling agent or as a bed to preserve things. This is a little different. This is a misozuke, which is basically miso with a little bit of alcohol that I added, but it's essentially the same, in theory, the same thing. You basically grab some vegetables and you bury them in this mixture. These are some nice, beautiful purple carrots that I had that I just buried in this miso. And I'll just let them sit here until I use them, maybe like a couple of weeks, and they'll be nice and soft. Honestly, I think they'll last at least 6 months to a year. I've been holding on to a lot of things just to see how long they really last. As far as like actually like being good to eat, like not going to get you sick, some of these things will last upwards of a year and a half, 2 years. Whether it's going to taste great, I don't know. Like some of these carrots, maybe after a year or two, they start tasting like really alcoholic, or certain flavors. But within like the first 6 months, this stuff is delicious to me. There's a similar preservation for fish as well. I would probably use the amazake with a little bit of salt for seafood. And things like that. Just bury the fish inside, underneath all that. And once again, like I said, just me, what I suggest from my experience in refrigerated temperature. Anything lower than that, especially if it's something that has a lot of fat, you're risking the fats and the oils to go rancid. There's, speaking of proteins and rancid, there's a couple of recipes in the Koji alchemy book where they talk about making cheese miso. Is basically they grab ricotta and koji and make a miso from that. And they found that they had to use, even in refrigerator temperatures, they had to use low fat to no fat ricotta. Anything full fat would just eventually turn rancid, even with refrigerator temperatures and even with the koji. So that was a little surprising, but yeah. I think it also has to do with the strain of kojis. One thing I didn't really talk about, it's not something I'm super experienced with. There's a lot of people out there that know a lot more than me about it, but there are a plethora of different strains of koji, and they all have different profiles of different varying amounts of the enzymes, and they produce different compounds basically. So it'll give off different tastes in the final result, if that makes sense. So another way I found to reduce waste and like add flavor to things. So back to the shio koji, what else is, at the restaurant, we'd always get like cases and garlic. We'd get by the caseload. So we'd go and sit and pick through and pick all the tight, pretty like actual full bulbs and use those for black garlic. And then the ones that were like the skin was broken or it was damaged, we take these and peel them and plop them in whole into a thick shio koji. It's basically a pureed, slightly thicker than normal shio koji. So not only would it flavor the shio koji, so it's now garlic shio koji, but it preserved the garlic in a way where even a year later, you pull it out of the shio koji and it was still actually crispy and tannin-like properties. If you use it in pickles, even like cucumber pickles, just drop a couple things of koji in there. It'll actually have almost tannin-like properties sometimes. Another way I used at a different restaurant was for the, they did a lot of juicing. So if you're a juicer and you always have extra carrot pulp, or if you peel your carrots, I personally don't peel my carrots. I always like to eat my peel. I just scrub them. But if you peel your carrots or whatever, if you have vegetable scraps from juicing, mix that with equal parts koji and 10 to 15, 20% salt, and let it age, and you got like a nice scrap miso. And if you make it even wetter, the liquid on top, like I said, that's my favorite thing, hands down, is that liquid that forms on top of all these delicious things.
What kind of liquid?
The liquid that forms on top of the amazake or miso or any of the amino pastes, any of these sauces, it's always going to separate a little bit. That liquid that forms on top is just really, really delicious. Another thing I've kind of gotten a little curious about, I guess, I don't know what, is I've been using leftovers just from dinner to make different amino sauces. So the first one I've made was in a restaurant a couple years ago, or last year actually, a year ago, which was we did duck confit at the restaurant. So we had leftover the duck bones left over, and then we also did this purple rice as a side dish for the restaurant. We'd always have some left over at the end of the night, and we didn't want to throw it away. So we took those duck bones, took the rice, and added more koji rice to cooked koji rice, water, salt, and just put it in a jar. And 6 months later, it was this amazing amino liquid. This one in front of me is a totally different one that I just made this week for this presentation. And this is, had dinner last week. I had a ribeye steak, a bone-in ribeye steak. So this is the bone from the ribeye steak. And these are the peels from the sweet potato that I had that night. And then I also had some greens with some sweet peppers in it. So I'll see like some little trim of sweet peppers in here, and some onions as well. I didn't want to do the greens just because I haven't had good success with that, but I'm going to experiment on that one of these days. But yeah, this is basically leftovers from dinner. Not even leftovers because it's the scrap. It's the bone, the peels, and then I added water, salt, and some koji. And in a couple months, granted, this is one of the longer taking times, like all the other applications I've talked about up until now are kind of quick. This is going to take at least a couple months. And this kind of thing, I do hold at room temp. I don't know, I guess with the bones, I don't feel as uneasy about it. Like I said, it's just personal preference. If you feel comfortable with it, if everything smells good, go for it, experiment. I've been comfortable and I've had great success with bones. I also did a ham hock, one with ham hock and pork ribs. And that was with sweet potato as well. That one turned out really great. Another thing, so this is like leftovers as well. This is hummus that we had. We had a hummus dip for dinner or appetizer, and we just had some left over. It really wasn't that much, just like half a cup, and we're just like, we didn't want to eat it the next day. And so I just threw some koji in it, blended it up, and some hummus koji. Hummus koji is going to be delicious in a week or two. I guess this is the one thing that I didn't get to finish because I didn't realize I'm in Alabama right now, and I didn't realize that it's a different time zone than the Eastern time zone. So unfortunately, I didn't get to finish this, but this is basically going to be my lunch. And it's basically chicken and like a chicken and mushroom and potato fricassee that I did. It's basically just stewed. But what I did was for seasoning, I have a, where did it go? I have this, and it's almost gone, but it's this mushroom, basically, I guess you could call it an amino paste, a tasty paste is what everyone's calling it, or a mushroom miso. It's not really a miso, I guess, but it's basically, I took mushrooms, and I sweated them down, just like halfway, not completely, but sweat them like halfway down, and just throw them in a jar with Koji, once again, Koji, water, salt. Just as long as you have your right ratios, you know, like 12%, 10 to 20% salt, anything above 8 to 10% is going to be relatively safe, especially if it's indoor AC temperatures. It's going to be fine. You don't need to go super heavy. Like a lot of recipes recommend you go past 20% salt. I usually like to go less salt. It always goes a little faster, and it creates more nuance in the flavor, I guess you would say. But yeah, so this is basically just mushrooms, Koji, and salt and water and thyme. Just let it sit for a long time, and then I pureed it, and you get like this paste. And this liquid is what formed at the top, and I just drained it off. So what I did for my lunch was I cooked some chicken, made like a little chicken broth, and I seasoned it first with this mushroom paste. Cooked it down, cooked the chicken until it was nice and delicious. Threw some potatoes in there, nice and delicious. And now that it's about done, it still needs a little more, you know. So I'll finish it with this mushroom soy or mushroom tamari, whatever you will. And yes, it's going to be a really delicious lunch. Yes, lastly, I could just say you can also use it just to enhance your everyday staples. If you like a particular brand of soy sauce or hot sauce, or if you make your own hot sauce, throw some Koji in there. Dry, wet, or shio Koji. You know, actually, you can enhance with any of the three forms. And you can. I personally dislike Kikkoman branded. Not to talk down upon any brand, but I personally dislike the flavor of Kikkoman. But you throw in some Koji in there and let it sit for a week or two, and it's actually really amazing. It tastes like a great soy sauce at that point. So it just kind of unlocks a lot of things. Like I said, just creativity is the only boundary. Whatever you can think of and be able to apply it. Oh, I think I forgot about one thing, and that's like brewing brewing alcohol in general. I don't know how many of you here are watching are home brewers or like to dabble with your own alcohol at home. But Koji is a great tool to use. I use it for a couple different things. It's essentially analogous to the malting process in other grains, where you unlock the starch content from whatever grain you're using. So it's kind of like the same as malting, as the way you would malt barley or rye or something else to make beer or a mash for a whiskey per se. But you're using the mold instead of its own natural enzymes, right? It's also a lot more efficient in that sense. But on the other side of that same coin, it also adds a different dimension of flavors, of course, being that it does produce different compounds than if you were just to use a malt.
So it is different, of course, but it is in essence analogous to it. Another reason I use Koji, or another purpose I use it for in brewing, is for clarification. And it basically, the proteins and the enzymes react with the phenols in whatever you're brewing, especially if it's something that's highly phenolic, like a wine, like a red wine or something. And it basically coagulates all these proteins that are suspended in the liquid, and it settles down. So it's actually the first form of commercial filtering for beers that make it, you see these beers that are extremely clear when you look through them. It was enzyme based. It was enzymatic based. They were industrially derived enzymes, but they were enzyme based. So in essence, it's the same thing when you use Koji in brewing different alcohols. Another purpose I use it for is just shelf stability. It just adds like another, like in any of the, across all these applications, it adds a certain level of shelf stability. And like I said, it's almost like a penicillin-like behavior where it just kind of wants everything else out, and it just wants itself to flourish. I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, I can keep giving examples of applications that I've done, but yeah, that's pretty much it. You can make soups more flavorful, to making charcuterie at home, to brewing alcohol more easy, to being more nutritious. All these things are just some of the advantages and positive things we get from Koji. And it's something I'd like to see used more and more at home in the coming years. I think more and more people are becoming interested, and people are very concerned about their health. And this is a great tool to get us there.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Does anybody have questions?
Yes. So I tried to get in right when the meeting started, and then got delayed coming back in. So I might have missed the first maybe 5 minutes. I'm very much into the whole like fermenting and preserving. I use a lot of miso in my foods and everything. Is it possible just to recap maybe the first beginning? Was it just a quick intro of how you make the Koji, or was it just the applications for it?
Yeah, the intro was just, I was just speaking about that specifically, about the different applications. Just a little introduction about myself. And, I've used Koji in a few different restaurants, and it's basically the only thing that's like ubiquitous now in my kitchen that I use like in almost every dish and almost every preparation, just because of its range of applications.
Would you feel comfortable doing a quick overview on how you make it at home?
Yeah,
Yes, that would be great.
Let me grab my incubation chamber from let me grab my.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's because, that'd be great, because I'm still really new to this. So awesome.
I can say I make a lot of Koji at home, and I really recommend the Shaki's book, Tempeh Miso Natto. I feel like that for me has been the clearest out of all the books that explain Koji making. I find that one was like the one that made it click for me.
Okay, I'll write that down. What was the name again?
It's in some order. Do you know what it is, Alex? It's called Miso Tempeh Natto, and it's by Kirsten and Christopher Shaki.
Yeah, that's it. So the Shakis they basically were my introduction into fermentation in general. I love them to death. They're great role models and very easy and open to speak with. But yeah, their book is amazing. I would say that I would agree 100% with Jackie in the sense of if you're making Koji at home and you want an easy, quick, foolproof way to do it,
Yeah.
it's definitely their way, the way they do it. It's just really easy and there's no way to fail doing it, basically. I do it a little differently because I started doing it before I saw their presentation. And I feel like with the way I've been doing it, you get a little more control. I don't know if it's that in a good way or a bad way, maybe in a bad way, but in the sense that sometimes, when you have too much control of things, they can get away from you a little bit. But I like it just because I like to tweak things, and I'm a bit of a nerd, but my setup is just very simple. It's literally an igloo cooler. It's literally just a cooler with a heating mat, and I have a thermostat. It basically just goes in. I just put the can you see that? Yeah, the thermostat in. Sorry, hold on, sorry. So this, I know it's backwards, guys, but this basically just reads the temperature and it turns the heating mat, it turns it on and off to regulate the temperature for you. And then I also have a separate one of these guys that controls humidity or monitors humidity, because I don't have something to control it, but it monitors it. And it looks exactly the same, just the tip of the probe looks a little different, but it says the percentage of humidity, and it's the same exact thing. And like I said, this is just a lot more technical. It's a lot more to control. There's a lot more to go wrong with my setup. It's just something I like just because I'm a bit of a nerd, but the way the Shakis do it in their book is basically a water bath. It's an immersion circulator, a sous vide, and that controls the water temperature constantly, consistently. You're never going to get an upward spike or downward spike in temperature because it's so precise and it controls it. And basically, you float your entire vessel that you're growing the Koji on, you float that on the surface of the water. And because it's on water, you don't have to worry about the moisture content in the incubation area because the water is just circulating. So it's getting the moisture that you need. So both things that are most crucial, humidity and temperature, are completely regulated consistently. So that's why the Shaki's method is pretty much the easiest and the best. Yeah. With that being said, there's a range of temperatures to grow Koji on, right? It can grow anywhere from in the low to mid 70 degrees up to 95, 98-ish. I think above 100 and 105-ish, I think it dies above that. But in that whole range, it can grow and flourish. But if you go towards a lower end of the range, so if you grow your Koji between 76 to 80 degrees, it's going to have more protein enzymes. If you grow your Koji at a higher temperature, at around 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to have, the final Koji is going to have more amylase, which is the starch enzyme. So it's going to more easily break down starches. And like I said, there's also so many different strains of Koji that they all run the range in between as well. So it just kind of depends on what your final goal is of what you're trying to do, whether that's make a dessert or make charcuterie, so or brew some alcohol. So it just kind of depends. Any questions on my incubation chamber?
Can you just go through the steps? Like first you cook the rice and you know, like the sort of steps to make it?
Yeah, so I don't have my setup with me that I normally use. I left that in Florida, but I normally use a steamer. It's not necessary. So like I was explaining earlier with with this Koji that's a lot drier and it's more crumbly, to get something like this, you would want to actually steam it where it's not actually directly in the water. I use a pressure steamer, like what's it called? Those what are those new pots? The
Instant Pot.
The Instapots. And I'll basically put a steamer insert and a rice net, and I'll put the rice in there so that it's not directly in the water and it's steaming it from underneath. And you just kind of have to move it around, just stir it around a few times just to make sure that it's even. But that's if you want like a drier Koji. You can just as easily just make rice the way you normally do. Just maybe take away a couple tablespoons of water. Once your rice is cooked, you want to let it cool down. You want to spread it out and let it cool down to below 105 degrees. Because if you put the spores on the rice above that, it's going to kill the spores and it's not going to do anything. So you have to wait for it to cool down. Once it cools down, actually I have some spores. This is just some spores I bought in the store last time I was in New York. Well, you can barely see that in the light. But basically it just comes powdered, and you just sprinkle it. I like to use a little mesh strainer deal just to kind of get it nice and even all over the rice. Sorry. And you just spread it all over. Mix it well, and I like to do two rounds. So I'll just do like half, sprinkle it, mix it, and then go again just to make sure like it's all evenly covered. You can't use too much. It's not really gonna. I mean, I guess you can use too much if you use a whole bag, but if you use a little more than what a recipe calls for, a little more, it's not that bad. You can use a little more just to make sure that the spores are in there. And it gets going. So then by this point, you already want to have your incubation set up all ready to go. You don't want to be caught with your rice inoculating your rice and then your vessel isn't prepared yet. So you want to start that first. You want to get it hot. And like I said, if you want, depending on what you want, what go between 80 degrees is the money range is between 80 to 95 degrees. So get your temperature right and get your humidity right in your chamber. If you're using the Kirsten Shockey's method, then really you just wait for your immersion circulator to say that the temperature is constant and it's the temperature you set it at. At that point, you just go ahead and just drop your Koji into your incubation chamber. In most cases, it's recommended to put drape a towel or some kind of cloth over top, not directly touching the rice or the grain, but just draped over top, so it'll kind of catch any actual condensation moisture, because you don't want to get like actual drops of water or actual water to condense on it. It's gonna cause issues. So you want to maintain that moisture level in the air, but not like not condense into actual droplets. Once you have it in your chamber, really you can forget about it for at least 12 hours. As long as you know that your temperature is constant and everything's fine, you can forget about it for at least 12 to 16 hours. At that point, you do want to start checking on it. If you have a more manual setup, the way I have, you really want to keep an eye on it, because at that point, it's going to start creating its own temperature, because at that point, the mycelium and all the fungal growth is really getting going, and it's going to start to create its own heat. Once that happens, you don't want that heat to spike. If that heat spikes, it's going to above 105. It's going to kill the mold. It's going to kill the Koji in general. So at that point, that's why you would want to keep an eye on it. But even then, with the Kirsten Shockey method, even at that point, you don't really have to watch it too much, because the water circulation is just going to keep that temperature constant. So it's never really going to spike. So really the only thing that you have to watch out for in the immersion circulator method is to not splash up water onto the Koji, or to get the towel or that you have on top, not to let it get wet. That would really be the only thing that you're watching for in that method. In about 36, and it just kind of depends on the conditions, the strain, it depends on a lot of things. Once you do it a few times, you'll get a rhythm for it, especially if you keep using the same brand or the same provider of spores. It'll be like consistent. You'll kind of get a pattern for it. But depending on what it is, between 36 to 48 hours is when you want to stop it. And once again, it's depending on what you want. You can let it go to spore. If you want to make like a soy sauce, like a traditional shoyu, they actually do let it go all the way to spore until you see the green powder form on the surface of it. And that just means like it's actually going to spore, and it's ready to produce its babies, so to speak. For other things, especially for like amazake, you don't want to take it that far, because it's going to be a little bit bitter, and it's going to have like a little bitter, like almost like a chlorophyll flavor too, like a chlorophyll taste. So it's going to be a little strange. So you don't want to take it that far if you're doing an amazake. But for shoyu, that's traditionally, yeah, they do take it all the way to spore. Think of that. I mean, that's the basics of it. Did anybody have any questions? Anybody understand all that?
Yeah. So yeah, I got that part, that you got it to incubate for depending on from 12 to 36, depending on what your end goal is. So then, is that where you pick up where I cut it into video? Then you take that, and you would take that dried product, and you can put it in a processor to make it like into seasoning, right? That powder, that's where you started, where I kind of caught the video where you started showing how you use it onto the scallops. You mix it with some salt, and then you have two different versions of it, just the pure kind of processed Koji, and then the Koji with the salt mix. Yes?
Yes, you got it.
Okay.
Sorry, I just
Okay,
want to
cool.
jump in. I think so. The step that Alex finished at, when you have your Koji after it's done incubating, that's fresh Koji. And if you want to turn it into a powder, you have to then dehydrate that product and then powder it.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to throw it in a dehydrator, otherwise it's not gonna go into a powder. As well, like I said, if that's your goal, if you want to get a powder, you want to steam your rice and make that Koji as dry as possible. Like the initial growth stage, you want to make it dry so that it comes out like crumbly and not
Soft textured.
Not like this, where it's like clumps of this was a cooked wheat, and it's like clumpy, versus this stuff is like, it's just straight, like it looks like rice. It's just obviously yellowy, but
Yeah. Okay.
the individual grains, I guess.
Okay. And is there any difference in the use of fresh Koji versus the dry Koji that you can make into like a powder, or is it just shelf life essentially?
It's shelf life and moisture content. Yeah, shelf life, and depending on what you're using it for. Yeah, the dry stuff will just last a little bit longer, but yeah, if you're using it for something dry like a seasoning, yeah, use that. If it doesn't matter, if you're just using it for a miso or a sauce, just go ahead and make it wet. It doesn't change the enzymatic action, if that's the question.
Okay, got you. Okay. And any recommendations, last question, any recommendations on brand or what Kojis to look out for? Or is it just a matter of depending on what your end goal is, if it's for meat, protein, or desserts, then you look for Kojis that specify in that direction? I mean, do you have any names that jump out to you to look out for?
So a lot of the strains are going to be proprietary for these companies. And as well, like I know, like where I've gotten my spores from in the past is Gem Cultures. And that's kind of like the most common, most popular. They've been around forever. If I'm not wrong, I think they've been around since the 90s or the 80s, something like that. I'm not too familiar with, because I haven't ordered from any other places. I know there are a ton of other places that are available. A lot of them are really old school. Like, I don't know if they still do. I haven't bought from in a while, but I know that Gem Cultures, like you have to email them and send them a paper check or a money order. Like they didn't have any online.
They take PayPal now.
Oh, they finally, awesome. They actually take PayPal now. That's great. Yeah. So that's how old school they were up until recently. So I know I saw this one page that I found, and it was all in Japanese, and I got Google to translate it, so it was all weird, like, you know, you could barely make sense of it. But it was this Japanese page, and it was like an actual Koji spore manufacturer in Japan. And they gave like the different profiles, like they had like, I don't know, like dozens and dozens of different strains, and it told you the specific enzyme profiles. Not all companies are going to be that specific. I'll try to find that and post it on my page. But yeah, like Gem Cultures is you can't go wrong with them. They're great. I just don't have too much experience with it. I want to say I know in the Miso Tempeh Natto book, she has some links or references. I'm not 100% sure if on the Koji Alchemy book, I would assume he has some references in that book as well.
Yeah, and so does Noma Guide to Fermentation. They all have like where to buy sections in the back.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll have like funky names. Like this one that I bought, you can't really see it's backwards. It says Shira Yuri, and that in Japanese means white. I think it's white lily. I can't remember it's a type of flower. Yuri is a type of flower. It's white lily or white something flower. And it's just a name that they gave it because this particular strain, the hyphae or the little hairs that grow on the Koji are particularly long. And if you look at it under a microscope, they look like little flowers apparently. So that's why they named it. And this one is ideal for sweet sake and shio koji and light colored misos, right? So it just kind of depends, and just ask questions. Like I said, for the most part, everybody in this community is down to answer questions. For the most part, we're all nerds just trying to geek out and explain and have someone share the enthusiasm that we do as well. So, or have someone to share the enthusiasm with, I mean. So just ask questions, and I'm sure people are out there will respond.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for the time and the instructions. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Any other questions?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
So I had a question about the incubation process. Like, let's say, so you said people have been using Koji for hundreds of years. So what would be a like ancestral way of incubating Koji? Like maybe instead of an igloo cooler, it's like a clay pot or something. Do you have knowledge of how humans were doing this like before plastic and electricity and stuff?
So actually, and I didn't, and this is funny because this is a great question, by the way, really great question, because this is actually something I didn't know too much about. I didn't really understand, honestly, until a couple weeks ago. Because when Koji was first presented to me, it's always been presented as you inoculate it and you incubate it, and these are the conditions that it grows in, right? So from my assumption and understanding of it, I always assumed and thought of it as, okay, so this is native from a specific region where this is the climate, not necessarily year round, but that's the climate where this thing came from, where Koji came from. That's the climate where it's from, right? So that's what I was always like assuming, and that's what I always thought and understood it as. And that's partially true, but not entirely. So like, for example, even today, the way traditional shoyu, or the original soy sauce in Japan, the way it's made, and on a side note, like actual shoyu is a purely Japanese product. The initial discovery of the molds and the actions were Chinese, and it was brought by a Buddhist monk who studied in China. He brought it back to Japan, and from there, just like everything that the Japanese grabbed their hands on, they just refine it and made it better. But to answer your question more directly, the way they do it, the way they make shoyu up until this day traditionally, it actually takes like 4 or 5 days for the koji to grow, because they grow it at ambient temperatures, and they're not actually controlling the environment the way we are. They're not. It's not exactly controlled like an incubation chamber. I recently just saw, like maybe a week or two ago, National Geographic, and this is a couple years old. You can YouTube it. It's on YouTube. It's like a National Geographic video of them going into a centuries old. I think they've been doing it for like 13 generations or something, but a centuries old shoyu factory. And I was surprised because, yeah, they just put the spores on it and they just put it in this room and just let it do its own thing with no heating or cooling or anything. So it's more like you're saying, it's more of like an ancient native where they're very attuned and very intuitive and very in tune with the way it's growing. And they've been doing it for so long and so many generations that, you know, they just know how it grows naturally, I guess. I don't know how else to answer it besides that, but to answer directly, yeah, there was no incubation. For tempeh specifically, which is from Indonesia, and it's a similar incubation parameters, where it's like really high humidity and like right around 90 degrees. But tempeh is shorter. Tempeh, I believe, is like 24 hours, I think. And the way they do that in Indonesia is they wrap it in banana leaves. They just wrap it in banana leaves. And it basically creates its own heat, and it's like a mat. And that's tempeh. So you could say—
Alex, I'm wondering if you can remember the name. I know there's a company that makes the traditional wooden containers, I think out of Massachusetts. I followed them on Instagram, but I don't have Instagram on my phone. But you can actually buy them now, and the wood helps keep the humidity in. Do you know who I'm talking about?
The Koji trays?
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember the name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really great because, like she said, the wood will absorb moisture, and it'll maintain that moisture level, especially if you put a damp towel over it. So I think that's part of how they're able to maintain the right parameters or the right conditions. But beyond that, I don't believe it's controlled very much.
That's cool. Have you ever heard of Lizzie Key by any chance? Anyone here?
Say that again?
Lizzie Key. She's Chinese.
No.
Okay, so she's this like famous Chinese YouTube star. Really check her out. She has like a variety of like primitive skills and has videos where she does things like this. So she has one where she makes soy sauce in the ancestral way, and I'm pretty sure I remember it being like soybeans that she just, you know, soaked them, inoculated with I think it was like wheat and then I guess Koji spore. She like rolled it in that, and then she left them on a bamboo mat in like a kind of like a closet, like a where they would keep different things. I don't know, it was just ambient temperature, but like in the shade, kind of like a pantry, I guess. And let it go to spore, where it got like kind of like green and fuzzy, and then she used that and she, you know, fermented that, and that became the soy sauce. So I do remember it just kind of being like she just let it grow, and there was just like a time lapse of it growing in like room temperature.
Yeah,
Can you
so-
write her name in the chat?
What
Yeah.
was the name? Yeah, exactly.
She's dope. Like I don't like, you know, fool around on like the internet so much. She's amazing. All her videos are amazing. My grandma loves her. My parents love her. You're gonna be obsessed now.
Okay,
Oh, Lisa.
cool.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So,
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that was like one question. And then the other question I had that was, you mentioned a few times, like to have like 8 to 15% salt or like 10 to 20% salt. Do you mean by like volume or by grams? Like
by weight.
by weight?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, just weigh the whole thing, like weigh everything, and then 10% salt.
Got you. Okay,
So if the whole thing weighs 250 grams, then add 25 grams of salt.
got you. Okay.
Going back to what you just said, that was really interesting. So I think one of the things, one of the reasons why I was always, I guess, recommended not to necessarily do it that way, is a possibility of other molds or other spores having gotten into your grain.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, you know, we see mold all the time on everything, whether it's a piece of bread or a banana or something, whatever. So there's always mold spores floating in the air everywhere, and it's one of those things you can't really eliminate. So when you grow in those conditions, there's always a risk that something else that you didn't put in there yourself will grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest reason why I think I've always been recommended not, and just to make sure that the parameters are, you know, kept within that range.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard that like people that traditionally made koji were like very isolated, and they were only allowed to eat certain foods so that there was like no risk of contamination from other like, you know, microbial cultures.
That's interesting though, because I've also like recently I was listening to a podcast where someone was talking about an anthropologist went to basically one of the last like hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa called the Kudzu, and they eat like 600 different varieties of wild foods, you know, that haven't been irradiated and haven't like traveled, right? So they're like super rich in the natural microbes of the land. And so this anthropologist from the UK decided to live with them and eat everything that they ate for 3 days, and then measure the differences in his gut microbiome. And like he noticed like a tremendous difference in his health and stuff. So I guess it's just been getting me thinking kind of like how humans naturally were interacting with so many different, you know, microbial cultures, you know, so maybe it's not like, I feel like maybe we like sanitize stuff too much. So I don't know like what your thoughts on that are. I know like other people who do ferments, like they're super chill with like their scobies, you know, and like some people take their sourdough starters like into the forest to go like collect wild, you know, stuff, or people like fermenting with wild yeast. So like I don't know what you think about that in relation to koji, and like also what you said of how it kind of outcompetes stuff. Like you feel like it's like safer, no?
It's a really fine, it's a scary fine line, I think. The reason I say scary is because when part of my introduction of what I was saying of of my personal introduction into molds and funguses in general was such a negative experience, and it really was like really bad. Like I was depressed. Like I legit had suicidal thoughts, and like I was losing weight. Like it was just really, and I was overall, besides that, healthy, but just had these really strange bad symptoms, and it was all due to this black mold growing in the wall. So that's, I think my fear is more based on my own experiences in that specific realm. Now, on another note, as far as the rest of my ferments, I'm right there with you. I'm more of a fan of wild ferments. The sourdoughs that I've done, I've done kind of similar to what you're saying, leave it actually outside overnight to catch whatever's in the air.
I'll interject that molds are very different than yeast and bacteria. So oftentimes like yeast and bacteria are kind of all happy together. And the beneficial yeast and bacteria will like fight off the bad guys, but that's not always the case with molds. And there's a lot more possibility for like, ooh, and now you're dead.
So, and I'll give you an example. Actually, I'll show you this one. This is actually a Koji I was going to show you guys. Forgot to show you this. Let me see if
I can see some green on it.
Yeah.
You see the green right there?
Some spots.
Yeah.
This was a Koji from, what was this? This was Oat Bran. This was Oat Bran Koji, and you see the spots everywhere. And basically, there were some spots that I guess it didn't get fully inoculated right, or I guess it just didn't penetrate everything, or because the moisture, Oat Bran is definitely one of those that I don't recommend you do until you're experienced and you know what you're doing with it, because consistency on those kinds of things is very important in the terms of spreading your spores and moisture content. Because basically those little patches that you see either the spores didn't get to it, the mycelium didn't get to that part, or maybe it was a little bit dry, so it maybe got right up to it, but because there was no moisture available, it didn't grow into the grain or, into the substrate. So sometimes that can happen when your substrate is not even. It'll grow into part of it, and then you'll have some splotchy spots, and then other spots will be perfect. So that's kind of what happened with that. It looked great when I put it away, but then I put it in the fridge too, and something else got in there, and it looks like trichoderma. Or I can't remember how you say it properly, but trich is something that is possibly poisonous to us. So there's always a danger for it in molds. That's the thing.
And so with that, like you would just like compost that or something? Like you wouldn't use that on food? You wouldn't like scoop around it?
I wouldn't. It's a risk. So here's the risk, and I guess I didn't really explain earlier when I was talking about the black mold, but basically Koji is a domesticated form of mold, right? So just like a cow, there are no such thing as cows in the wild, right? Koji is a domesticated form of a mold that once was wild, right? So cows came from oxen and something else. So in the same vein of analogy, think of it, there's thousands and thousands of molds out there, but there's only one Aspergillus oryzae. There's a couple different Kojis, right? There's Aspergillus sojae, Aspergillus awamori. Those are different species of Koji, not just strains, but those are actual different species. Within those species are strains as well. But these toxic molds, what happens is they have a gene in their genetic makeup. They have a gene that produces aflatoxins and mycotoxins. And these are very dangerous to most living creatures. I think almost all living creatures, very dangerous. And it's just really bad. And it's usually found on decomposing walls, especially in like places in the South, like in Florida and Alabama, in homes where it's really hot and humid, and you can be trapped inside walls and stuff. And yeah, so basically mycotoxins and aflatoxins, very, very bad. They can kill you. Koji, it doesn't have that gene. The actual gene for creating these aflatoxins are not present in the genetic makeup of Koji. So that's the big difference. And that's why also most experts recommend against you growing your own spores and reusing your own spores. You can take your Koji all the way to spore, and then in theory, take those spores and grab a little sifter and sift that little green dust off. And in theory, you could reuse that again. And you can, and most experts will say that's fine to do it once or twice. But after a second or third generation, it continuously gets weaker and weaker. And it's just not the same conditions that the lab growers, that these commercial and industrial Koji growers or Koji spore growers, that how they manufacture it. Because even like almost all the traditional soy sauce makers and all these people that they really make their own stuff, they still buy spores from other companies. For the most part, like 90% plus, they buy spores. They don't grow their own spores because it's that delicate of a process. That was a long answer to your question.
It was a good answer though, because if I had gotten into Koji, like I probably might experiment with like harvesting my own spores. But it's good that you said that, to know.
The only thing, or what I can recommend the most to kill spores, to kind of sanitize and purify your area and like your utensils and your hands and anything, is just straight undiluted white vinegar. Full strength. If you can get more than 5%, if you can get 6%, 8%, even better. Just try to stay away from any vinegars that have any like additives. Like sometimes they'll add like lemon extract, or the stronger ones, the 6% plus, sometimes they'll add like additives to it and stuff. Just try to avoid those. But I just use 5% vinegar, and that kills mold spores. It's just like I said, the only danger is if there's something floating in the air and it falls as you're doing it. But if you're working fast enough and you have everything sanitized, you should be relatively okay to do that.
Cool.
Awesome. Any other questions?
The salts that you use, is there specific salts? Does it matter? I think when we did the kombucha or the June presentation, they talked about, the simpler the sugar, the better. Is it like the salt thing? Is it kosher, iodine, sea salt, fine salt, coarse?
So the salt is going to differ in flavor profile. But as far as like any actual effect on the fermentation, it could depend on, hold on, I guess a caveat would be it could depend on the salt if it's really high in minerals, if it's high in a certain mineral. Like for example, you never really want to use iodized table salt in ferments, because the iodine generally will kill most bacteria. It'll stop fermentation activity. So anything like that has like a high mineral content, it might act differently. But besides that, there's no like direct effect. It's more like the flavor differences because of the minerals. Just like, pink salt tastes different than like French sea salt. It has like its own little thing, like its own taste. Actually, just evaporated sea salt from any place, it's very distinct and unique to its own location, right? But that would be the difference.
Heading's not that.
Mineral quality. Say what?
That was a ghost.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, no, I mainly use pink salt just because I like it. I get it relatively cheap, and sea salt, and just like I have some finishing salts and some fancy salts just to play around with. But I won't use the fancy salts for ferments and whatnot. It's not worth to use the fancy stuff.
Okay, cool. I'll check out that book.
All right. Well, I've recorded this, so I'll put it up on the internet, and you can refer back to it in future. And Alex's email address was in the to section of the reminder email that I sent. So I'm sure he would love for you to reach out to him about any questions you have along the journey.
Yes, email me and I'll respond.
Thank you for your time, Alex. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks.
See y'all soon.
This was great, Jackie. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your week, guys.
Yeah.
You too.